The people of Silverton Ridge gathered at dusk, their faces lit not by lanterns, but by the harsh glow of judgment. Dust swirled in the evening wind, stinging eyes and throats. In the center of the street stood a woman in chains. Her dress, once neat and proper, now hung in tatters, streaked with dirt and ash. Eliza Morrison, once the town's beloved schoolteacher, now bore the weight of every whispered slander, every cruel glance. Children who had once adored her, reciting verses and laughing at her stories, hid behind their mothers' skirts. Men muttered about sin and scandal. And behind them all, with his boots planted firm and his cigar burning low, Edward Kane, the cattle baron, watched in silence. It was his son's lies that had condemned her, but it was the town's eagerness to believe them that had sealed her fate. Sheriff Dalton read aloud the sentence, his voice booming with false righteousness. For theft, for deceit, for bringing shame upon Silverton Ridge, Eliza Morrison is hereby exiled beyond our borders. Let the wilderness, or whatever spirit haunts it, pass its own judgment. No one said the name aloud, but every heart beat faster at the thought. Naich, the Ghost Rider. An Apache raider, a phantom whispered about in taverns, painted in stories of blood and vengeance. Some said he rode with skulls tied to his saddle. Others swore he could vanish like smoke, killing without a sound. Whatever the truth, the townsfolk believed one thing. If they abandoned Eliza at the edge of the desert, the Ghost Rider would claim her, and their own lives would remain untouched. Chains clattered as Dalton shoved her forward. The crowd parted, half relieved, half hungry for spectacle. No one reached out. No one spoke for her. Eliza staggered, barefoot in the dirt, her heart hammering louder than the murmurs that followed her. By the time the gates of Silverton Ridge closed behind her, darkness had swallowed the sky. Coyotes howled in the distance. She sank to her knees, trembling, the weight of despair pressing down. Betrayed by the people she had come to teach, stripped of dignity, cast into the jaws of the desert, what choice remained? That was when she heard it, a hoofbeat, low and deliberate, echoing off the stones. Another, then another. From the shadows beyond the mesquite trees, a rider emerged. His horse moved with silent power, its eyes reflecting the fire of the setting sun. The man astride it was draped in buckskin and dark braids, his face half hidden in shadow. The stories called him a butcher, a phantom, a curse. But when he looked at her, his gaze was steady, not cruel. In his hand gleamed the edge of a knife. With one swift motion, he cut the iron from her wrists. The chains fell, rattling against the rocks. Eliza stared, breathless, waiting for the killing blow. Instead, his voice came, low and certain. "You can crawl back to those who chained you," he said. "Or you can ride with me. The choice is yours." And for the first time since her world had crumbled, Eliza Morrison felt the faint, fragile stir of something she thought was lost: freedom. Eliza hesitated, her wrists raw where the shackles had bitten deep. She rubbed them slowly, still expecting the man before her to laugh, to strike, to drag her into the shadows as the townsfolk had whispered he would. But he did none of that. The rider simply sat astride his horse, motionless as stone, his eyes watching her with something colder than hatred, yet strangely free of cruelty. His face bore the sharp lines of the desert itself, weathered, scarred, but unbroken. In his silence there was no hunger for blood, only the weight of a man who had seen too much of it. The wind carried a faint rattle of her fallen chains. Behind her, the lights of Silverton Ridge flickered faintly on the horizon. No one would come for her. No one would call her back. She had been handed to death, and they would sleep easier believing it done. Her lips parted. Why did you cut me free?" The rider dismounted. He moved with the ease of a predator, but without menace. When he stood before her, she saw he was taller than she expected, his frame lean but powerful, his braids bound with strips of leather. He carried no trophies, no skulls, no evidence of the ghastly tales that had made children shiver by their hearths. "My people call me Nightjay," he said at last, voice low and even. "The whites call me Ghost Rider. They tell stories so they can fear me. Fear keeps them safe, and fear keeps me alive." Eliza swallowed hard. Every tale she had heard, villages burned, men butchered, women vanished into the desert, clashed with the man who now stood over her, offering not a rope, but a choice. "I don't belong with them anymore," she whispered. Naich studied her for a long moment. Perhaps he searched for weakness, perhaps for truth. Then, without a word, he held out his hand. The desert around them was vast and merciless. Coyotes wailed again, their cries rising like a chorus of the damned. The chill of night began to seep through Eliza's tattered dress. She looked once more toward the faint glow of Silverton Ridge. She saw only betrayal. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Naich lifted her easily, setting her on the horse behind him. The animal snorted, stamping its hooves in the dust. With a nudge of his heel, they moved, leaving the abandoned shackles glinting faintly under the moonlight. As they rode deeper into the desert, Eliza clung to the saddle, her thoughts a storm. She had traded one peril for another. Yet in the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, in the calm silence of the man who carried her away, a strange truth stirred in her heart. Perhaps she had not been delivered into death. Perhaps she had been delivered into something else entirely. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The desert did not welcome her. It pressed against Eliza Morrison with a furnace heat, scalding her skin and blinding her eyes with sheets of white light. The saddle beneath her felt less like leather and more like a slab of stone, each jolt sending pain through her spine. Her mouth cracked with thirst. Even the air seemed to steal moisture from her lungs. She had thought exile from Silverton Ridge was death enough. But now, as the horizon shimmered in waves of heat and the earth cracked like broken pottery, Eliza realized the desert itself could finish what the townsfolk had begun. Naich rode ahead, silent as ever, his posture steady, unbothered by the same sun that seemed to sear her alive. He had cut her chains, given her a choice, and she had taken it. Yet freedom came at a cost she had not imagined. Her grip faltered on the saddle horn. She swayed. For a moment she thought she would fall, let the sand swallow her whole. Then his horse slowed. Without a word, Naich reined in beside her, swung down, and reached into a rawhide pouch at his side. He held out a canteen. Eliza blinked, hesitant. The stories of the Ghost Rider echoed in her ears, tales of poisoned water, of cruel tricks before the kill. But her body betrayed her doubts. She drank, the lukewarm water flooding her tongue like a miracle. When she handed it back, Naich gave a small nod, then passed her a strip of dried venison jerky. "Eat," he said simply. His tone carried no kindness, no cruelty either, only command, the voice of a man who had lived too long in harsh places. She chewed slowly, salt and smoke filling her mouth. For the first time since she left the town's gates, strength returned to her limbs. Hours stretched on. The sun dipped lower, trading its blazing fire for a cruel, biting chill. Shadows lengthened across the desert floor. Naich finally led the horses to a patch of mesquite trees, tethering them in the sparse shade. Eliza slid down clumsily, legs trembling. She wanted to thank him for the water, but pride and fear tangled her words. Instead, she managed a question. Why not leave me behind? Wouldn't it be easier?" Naich's dark eyes lifted toward the horizon, where the sky burned red over jagged mountains. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, like a man weighing each word. "Easier does not mean right," he said. He gathered brush, striking flint to spark a small fire. The flames cracked weakly against the rising night wind. Eliza sat close, wrapping her arms around herself, listening to the desert's eerie silence. Somewhere in the distance a coyote cried, its voice long and mournful. Nietzsche sat across the flames, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His expression gave nothing away. Yet in the firelight, Eliza saw something the townsfolk of Silverton Ridge had never shown her. Not mercy, not kindness, but a strange and steady dignity. For the first time since her exile began, she felt safer beside the man called Ghost Rider than she ever had among the so-called righteous of her own people. The fire burned low, its glow no more than a fragile halo against the immensity of the night. Stars stretched endlessly above them, so sharp and cold they seemed almost close enough to touch. Eliza sat close to the flames, her knees drawn up beneath her chin, trying to gather what warmth she could from the reluctant embers. Across from her, Nietzsche sat cross-legged, his knife resting idle now, his gaze fixed on the sand at his feet. Silence stretched long between them. The desert was not empty, she realized. It whispered with the sigh of wind through cactus spines, the shuffle of unseen creatures, the occasional cry of a night bird. She wanted to ask him who he truly was, what he intended for her, why he had spared her when the town had not. But the weight of his silence made questions feel fragile, like glass that might shatter in her throat. At last he spoke, not looking at her, but at the fire. "They took me when I was a boy." His voice was flat, without tremor, yet heavy with something she could not name. "Soldiers came. They burned our camp, drove us like cattle to the mission. They cut my hair, burned my clothes, gave me new ones." He paused, as though the fire itself needed to swallow the memory before he could continue. "They told me my name was Joseph." Eliza's breath caught. "Joseph," she repeated softly. Nietzsche's mouth hardened. "I learned their words, their prayers, their punishments." His English, until now sparse and rough, suddenly flowed with a startling fluency, clipped, precise, too polished to belong wholly to him. "I spoke it better than my own tongue, until one day I could no longer remember the songs of my people." He looked at her then, his eyes dark pools lit by fire. "That is what they call saving." Eliza could almost see it, a boy stripped of his language, his family, his God. A boy taught that salvation came only through erasure. Her heart tightened. "You still remember," she said gently. "Not enough," Nietzsche replied. He picked up a stick and dragged it across the sand, leaving sharp, deliberate lines. "They said I was no longer Apache. But when I left them, I was not white either. So what am I?" The stick snapped in his hand. He let the pieces fall. For a moment, neither spoke. Eliza stared at the broken wood glowing faintly in the firelight, and thought of herself. Cast out by the very people she had served, declared unfit, left to die. She had been their teacher, their neighbor, their friend. Yet one lie had been enough to strip her of every belonging. "You're a survivor," she whispered at last. Nietzsche tilted his head as if weighing her words, testing them against years of bitterness. Then he said nothing more. The silence returned, but it was different now. No longer the silence of suspicion, but of two exiles bound by wounds neither had chosen. When Eliza finally lay down, wrapping her arms tight around herself against the chill, she listened to the desert's breathing and thought, perhaps they were not so different, the outcast schoolteacher and the boy once called Joseph. By midday the next day, the desert air shimmered with heat. Eliza's body had grown sore and weary, but she had learned not to complain. Every ounce of energy was needed simply to endure. Still, she noticed when Nietzsche's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing on the horizon. Smoke, a thin, gray column rose against the blue sky, carried upward by the wind. The smell came next, acrid, sharp, too heavy to be a cooking fire. Nietzsche clicked his tongue softly, steering his horse toward the trail that led west. Eliza followed without question, dread building with every step. When they reached the homestead, her heart broke. The Pattersons' small ranch house, once whitewashed and proud, stood blackened, its roof caved in, timbers still smoldering. The corral lay open, gates swinging loose, animals gone. A man's body slumped near the well, face hidden beneath blood and ash. A woman lay just inside the doorway, dress torn, her hands reaching outward as though she had tried to shield her children from the flames. Eliza gasped, covering her mouth. For a moment, she could not breathe. The world blurred with smoke and grief. Naiche dismounted and moved with a hunter's caution, scanning for danger. He crouched near the woman, his hand brushing her shoulder, then shaking his head. Too late. Eliza sank to her knees in the dirt, whispering a prayer she barely remembered, a prayer for the souls whose lives had ended here. Then, faintly, beneath the crackle of burning timbers, a sound. A muffled cry. She froze. "Did you hear?" Naiche raised a hand for silence. He tilted his head, listening. Then he strode to the root cellar door near the barn, half buried in ash. A bar had been thrown across it, perhaps by desperate hands before the fire closed in. Naiche pulled it free. The door creaked open, and from the darkness 3 pairs of eyes blinked up at them. A girl of perhaps 10, her arm around a smaller sister, and between them a boy no older than 4. Their faces were streaked with soot, their bodies trembling with hunger and fear. Eliza's heart surged. She reached down at once, calling softly, "Come, little ones, you're safe now." The older girl hesitated, clinging to the frame. Her gaze flicked to Naiche, the braids, the buckskin, the knife at his side. Fear widened her eyes. Eliza turned quickly, her voice firm but gentle. "He won't harm you. He helped me, and he'll help you too." For a long moment, the only sound was the crack of burning wood. Then, slowly, the girl lifted her brother, climbed the steps, and fell into Eliza's arms. Eliza held them close, feeling their thin ribs, their trembling shoulders. Tears stung her eyes. These children had lost everything, yet they were still alive. Naiche stood nearby, silent, his expression unreadable. But when Eliza looked up, she saw his hand tighten on the hilt of his knife, his jaw set hard. He knew, as she did, that this was no random fire. This was war, creeping closer. And now they carried with them not only their own fragile lives, but 3 more souls who depended on them for survival. The children rode double with Eliza, their small bodies pressed close against her as the horse trudged forward through the sand. Sarah, the eldest, kept her chin high though her lips trembled. Little Mary buried her face in Eliza's torn dress, clutching at the fabric as if it were the last thread tying her to life. Thomas, only 4, whimpered softly, each seemed a needle in Eliza's heart. Every step forward seemed heavier. The desert had been cruel before, but now every gust of wind, every shadow on the ridge carried new weight. She was no longer fighting only for herself. Their lives depended on her and on the silent figure who rode ahead. Naiche scanned the horizon, bow drawn across his saddle. His movements had grown sharper, more alert. Eliza realized he was no longer only a guide. He was a shield. Still, when his gaze flicked back toward the children, his expression hardened, almost bitter. At dusk, they stopped by a dry wash. Naiche started a fire with brisk efficiency, his hands sure, his eyes restless. Eliza gathered the children close, wrapping them in her shawl. They ate the last of the jerky he offered, chewing slowly, too tired even to cry. When the children finally slept, Eliza looked across the fire. "We can't leave them," she said. Naiche's eyes narrowed. "They are not ours. They are innocent." His jaw tightened. "And my people's children, were they not innocent too when soldiers cut them down? Who weeps for them?" The words struck like a blow. Eliza flinched, then steadied herself. She met his gaze, her voice low but steady. "I cannot answer for every cruelty. I can only answer for what stands before me now. And these children, they are ours tonight, whether we wished it or not." Nietzsche said nothing. His eyes reflected the flames, hard and unreadable. Silence stretched. Then, softly, Eliza spoke again, more to herself than to him. "The world is darkness, Nietzsche, but light still shines. That's what I was taught. That's what I believe." Nietzsche's expression flickered, a shift so subtle she almost missed it. He turned away, as though unwilling to let her see the war inside him. Later, as the fire burned low, Eliza woke to a sound. She lifted her head and saw Nietzsche kneeling near Thomas, adjusting the blanket around the boy's shoulders. His hand lingered a moment, gentle, almost reverent. Then he rose swiftly, resuming his post with bow in hand, as if nothing had happened. Eliza lay back, tears blurring her eyes. The Ghost Rider was supposed to be a monster. Yet in that quiet moment, she had seen not a raider, not an outlaw, but a man burdened by choices, torn between rage and something gentler he could not yet name. The children slept on, unaware. And as dawn's gray light crept over the desert, Eliza knew. Their survival had become her calling, and perhaps Nietzsche's too, though he had yet to admit it. By the third day, the desert began to change. The hard, endless flats gave way to cliffs streaked with color, red and gold and white like a painter's brush across the sky. The air grew cooler as they rode into a narrow canyon where cottonwoods clung stubbornly to the banks of a trickling stream. For the children, it was the first sound of water that was more than a mouthful. Their eyes lit with relief. Nietzsche dismounted without a word, leading them deeper into the canyon. At last, the walls opened into a hidden valley, shielded on all sides by stone. A waterfall spilled from high above, scattering into mist before striking a pool clear enough to show the sky twice. Behind the curtain of water, dark and silent, yawned the mouth of a cave. "This is where we rest," Nietzsche said simply. Eliza followed the children inside, her breath catching at what she saw. The cave walls were alive with paintings, pictographs etched and painted in ochre and black. Lines of riders on horseback, hunters with bows, spirals that seemed to tell of journeys older than memory. Handprints pressed against the stone as if ancestors had left their mark for generations unborn. The children stared wide-eyed. Thomas reached out a tiny hand as though to touch, but Eliza caught it gently. "Careful, love," she whispered. "These are sacred." Nietzsche stepped beside them, torchlight flickering across his face. For once, his hard expression softened. "My people painted here before your people came. Stories of hunts, of battles, of prayers. Each handprint a life, each mark a promise." Eliza studied him in the shifting light. In this place, he was not the Ghost Rider the town had feared. He was a man rooted in something far deeper, a keeper of memory, carrying a weight too large for one pair of shoulders. She turned to one painting, a figure standing between two fires, hands outstretched as if holding both back. "What does this one mean?" she asked. Nietzsche's gaze lingered, his voice dropped low. "It means the world will tear you apart if you stand between enemies, but still, someone must." For a moment, silence filled the cave. Water dripped, steady as a heartbeat. Eliza felt her throat tighten. She thought of her exile, of the children huddled by the fire, of this man who lived between two names, Joseph and Nietzsche, and belonged fully to neither. Without meaning to, she reached out and traced the figure's outline with her fingertips. Her hand trembled slightly. Nietzsche's hand rose, covering hers to guide it. His touch was firm, not tender, yet the gesture carried a weight that words could not. They stood that way a moment, side by side, the flame throwing their shadows long across the ancient walls. When they pulled apart, nothing had been spoken, yet something unspoken had passed between them. Not passion, not yet, but trust. Outside, the children laughed at the waterfall, splashing in the spray. Their voices echoed through the valley, light against the heavy silence of stone. Eliza closed her eyes. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, she felt she was standing on ground meant for more than survival. She was standing on ground where hope might take root. The sacred valley seemed untouched by time, a sanctuary hidden from the world's cruelties. But sanctuary never lasted long. By the third night, even the silence felt strained, as though the stones themselves held their breath. Naich heard them first, the distant drumming of hooves faint against the canyon walls. He rose swiftly, bow in hand. Eliza gathered the children close, her heart hammering. Moments later, 2 riders emerged through the narrow pass, their figures painted with dust and shadow. They were Apache, like him. The taller one swung down from his horse and clasped Naich's arm in greeting. They spoke rapidly in their own tongue, words sharp as arrows. Eliza caught none of it, but the urgency in their voices tightened her chest. At last, Naich turned. His face was darker than she had ever seen it. "My cousins," he said. "They bring word." He paused, then added, "A raid will fall on Fort Bowie within 2 nights." Eliza froze. Fort Bowie? The name carried weight. It was the nearest garrison, where settlers fled for safety, and where, Eliza suddenly remembered with a sick twist of her stomach, the Patterson children's surviving kin had been taken after the attack. Sarah, who had been listening, clutched Eliza's sleeve. "My aunt," she whispered, eyes wide. "She's there. She said she'd wait for us at the fort." Naichi's cousins went on, their voices rising. One pointed sharply toward the cave, then to the children. His tone was accusatory, angry. Eliza did not need translation. She knew what they were saying. These white children were not worth saving. Naichi argued back, his voice taut with fury. The words came fast, his hand cutting through the air. His cousin shouted something that echoed off the stone, then spat in the dirt at his feet. At last the riders turned, wheeling their horses, vanishing into the canyon the way they had come. The valley grew quiet again, though the air trembled with the echo of their voices. Eliza stepped forward. "Naich, what did they say?" He stood still for a long moment, his back to her. At last he turned, his face shadowed by torchlight. "They say I have forgotten who I am, that I choose the enemy over my own blood." His jaw clenched. "They say if I stand in their way, I will be cut down with the rest." Silence pressed in. The children huddled together, their eyes wide and wet with fear. Eliza felt the weight of their small bodies against her, and something fierce rose in her chest. "We cannot abandon them," she said firmly. "Not to the desert, not to a raid. Their lives are in our hands." Naich's eyes locked with hers, the firelight glinting in the dark depths. For a heartbeat, she saw the war inside him, loyalty to blood, to history, to every wrong carved into his people's bones. And against it, a fragile but growing bond to her, and to the children who clung to her skirts. At last he spoke. His voice was low but steady. "Then we go to Fort Bowie. Together." Eliza exhaled, trembling with both relief and dread. For in that choice lay not only danger, but betrayal, to his people, to the life he had been born into. The Ghost Rider had turned his horse toward a new path. And there would be no turning back. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. Fort Bowie rose out of the desert like a battered fist, its wooden palisades etched by wind and sun. By the time Naich and Eliza reached it, twilight had fallen, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and red. The children stirred with hope at the sight of the fort's lanterns flickering against the dusk. For a moment, it felt like safety. Then the first shot cracked through the night. The echo rolled like thunder across the canyon walls. A second followed, then a volley, gunfire splitting the quiet. Screams pierced the air as settlers scrambled inside the gates. In the distance, war cries rose, sharp and unrelenting, and Eliza's blood ran cold. The raid had begun. Naich's horse reared as flaming arrows arced overhead, striking the outer palisade. Wood splintered, fire catching fast. Eliza clutched Sarah and Mary close against her, while little Thomas buried his face in her skirt, trembling. The gates ahead swung shut, soldiers shouting orders, but chaos reigned, townsfolk pushing to get inside, soldiers firing wildly into the dark. Naich dismounted in one fluid motion, scanning the battlefield with the precision of a hawk. His hand found Eliza's arm. "Stay low, stay with me." The words were command, not plea. Yet Eliza obeyed, crouching as he pulled them toward a side entrance where the press of bodies thinned. Gunpowder bit at her throat, the air thick with smoke. Inside the walls, the scene was worse. A barn smoldered, livestock screaming as they fled through broken gates. A wagon overturned, trapping a man beneath its wheel. Soldiers scrambled from barracks, their boots striking against hard ground, their eyes wild with fear. Eliza's heart pounded. She had seen anger before, hatred, but never this madness, this storm of fire and steel. Naich moved like he had been born for it. He seized a fallen rifle, checked its load with swift precision, and fired toward the breach. His shot cut the air with terrifying accuracy, scattering a wave of attackers pressing the gate. For an instant, Eliza saw him not as the ghost rider whispered in taverns, but as something far more dangerous, a man who chose where to aim. "Inside, now!" he barked. They pressed into the courtyard. The children stumbled, coughing, clinging to Eliza's hands. The fort was no sanctuary now. It was a trap of smoke and confusion. Yet even here there was no turning back. Another explosion. This time the powder shed shook the ground. Flames leapt higher, embers raining down like burning snow. Eliza shielded the children with her shawl, her ears ringing. Naich caught her gaze. In that glance, she saw what he already knew. They were caught in the heart of the storm. No road led back to the desert, no chance to slip quietly away. Their path was forward, through the fire, into the very teeth of the raid. And for the first time, Eliza understood. This was not just his battle, it was theirs. The courtyard was a storm of panic. Soldiers shouted orders no one obeyed. Women clutched children. Men scrambled for weapons or cover. The smoke turned everything into a blur of flame and shadow. Through the chaos, Eliza heard it, faint but desperate, the cries of children. Not Sarah, Mary, or Thomas, other children. Her head snapped toward the sound. Beyond the burning barn, a group of townsfolk had crowded into the old storage shed. Its flimsy walls shook with every impact from outside. And pressed against the barred door, tiny hands clawed and pounded. "They're trapped!" Eliza's voice cut through the din. Naich saw it too. He cursed under his breath, scanning the distance. The shed sat exposed, arrows thudding into its walls, smoke curling from the roof. Too dangerous. "They'll burn alive if we don't move!" Eliza's voice trembled, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. She thrust Sarah and Mary into the arms of a nearby soldier, her voice sharp. "Take them! Don't let go!" Before Naich could stop her, she was running. Her skirts tangled around her legs, heat seared her skin, but she pushed forward, ducking low as bullets cracked overhead. She felt more alive in that instant than she had in all the days of hiding and fear, because she was moving toward life, not away from death. Naich growled, then sprinted after her. Together they reached the shed. The door groaned under the weight of terrified hands inside. "Step back!" Naichi barked, raising the rifle like a battering ram. One strike, then another. The wood splintered, the bar snapped, and the door swung open. Faces appeared, pale, soot-streaked, eyes wide with terror. At the front, Eliza saw them, two of the Patterson cousins, clinging to each other, their cries sharp with recognition. "Aunt Eliza!" Her heart wrenched. Without hesitation, she pulled them out, wrapping them against her, whispering, "You're safe now, you're safe." Behind them poured more, women clutching infants, a wounded man dragging his leg. Naichi pushed them toward cover, standing tall against the barrage of arrows. Then it came, the snap of a bowstring, the whistle through smoke. Eliza saw it an instant too late. The arrow struck Naichi high in the shoulder, the force driving him back a step. He staggered, teeth clenched, but did not fall. Blood blossomed dark across his buckskin. "No!" Eliza's scream cut the night. She reached for him, but he shook his head, eyes blazing. "Move them!" he snarled, shoving her toward the civilians. His voice broke no argument. Eliza gathered the children, guiding them to the stone root cellar near the fort's wall. One by one they disappeared inside, huddling in the dark safety as the fort roared with chaos above. When the last child was inside, Eliza turned back. Naich stood alone in the open, arrow jutting from his shoulder, rifle in hand, firing with grim precision to cover their retreat. For the first time since she had met him, Eliza felt terror not of him, but for him. Inside the cellar, the air was thick with fear. Dozens huddled in the dim space, children whimpering, mothers whispering prayers, old men clutching hunting rifles with trembling hands. Outside, the fort shook with the sounds of war, musket fire, shouts, the roar of fire eating through timber. Naich staggered down the steps last, his shoulder bleeding freely where the arrow jutted. Eliza reached for him, but he pushed her hand away, jaw clenched. His eyes swept the cellar, measuring the people, the space, the danger. Then a shout split the air. "Seize him!" Two soldiers stormed in, rifles raised, eyes locked on Naich. Behind them, an officer followed, his face pale with smoke and fury. "That's the Ghost Rider," he spat. "He led them here. He's the reason we're under attack." The cellar erupted in gasps. Women pulled children tighter, men shifted uneasily, fear and hatred filling the cramped space. Naich did not flinch, though his hand tightened on the rifle. His voice came calm, cold. "I saved your people from burning alive." "Lies," the officer barked. He lifted his pistol, aiming squarely at Naich's chest. "Step away from the civilians." Eliza's heart lurched. Without thought, she threw herself in front of Naich, arms spread wide. "Stop!" Her voice cracked with the force of it. "He is not your enemy. He saved me. He saved the Patterson children. He is the reason any of us are alive." At her words, Sarah stepped forward, clutching Mary's hand. "It's true," she whispered, her small voice cutting through the chaos. "He pulled us from the fire." Thomas piped up too, his voice trembling but fierce. "He's good. Don't hurt him." The soldiers faltered. Eyes flicked between the officer, the blood running down Naich's arm, and the terrified children clinging to Eliza. Doubt crept into the smoky air. Naich's gaze never left the officer. "You want your fort to stand? Then stop wasting time pointing guns at me. Reinforcements must be called, now." The officer sneered. "And who'll risk running through that fire? You?" Naich stepped forward, wincing but steady. His voice was iron. "I can. The telegraph office still stands. I was taught their code, long ago, in the school your people forced upon me. Tonight, I'll use it to save every soul in this place." A stunned silence followed. Eliza saw it, the crack in the officer's certainty, the flicker of recognition that this man, half enemy and half savior, held their only chance. Finally, the officer lowered his pistol, though his glare burned. "One chance. Fail us, and it's your blood." Naich nodded once. Then he turned to Eliza. For a fleeting moment, pain softened his eyes. "Stay with them. Keep them safe. If I fall—" She cut him off, her voice fierce with faith she barely knew she carried. "You will not fall." And in that moment, in the depths of fire and doubt, a fragile alliance was forged. The night outside the cellar was alive with fire. Smoke curled into the sky, choking out the stars. The air quaked with musket fire and the dull roar of men shouting and dying. Naich pushed through the chaos, his steps heavy, blood dripping from his shoulder with every stride. Eliza stayed close, half guiding him, half pulled by his sheer momentum. The children's cries still echoed behind them in the cellar, urging her forward. Ahead, the telegraph office stood on the far edge of the fort, a squat stone building, miraculously untouched but surrounded by chaos. Sparks rained from burning roofs nearby, and the sound of Apache war cries cut through the smoke. Naich raised his rifle, firing once to clear a path. Then he stumbled. Eliza caught his arm, steadying him, her face tight with fear. "You're bleeding too much." He grimaced, forcing his feet forward. "Not yet, not until it's done." They darted from wall to wall, crouching low as bullets snapped through the air. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest, each step a miracle. Once, a flaming arrow hissed past her cheek, the heat searing her skin. She flinched, but Naich yanked her onward, his hand firm and unyielding. At last they reached the office. Naich kicked the door in, and they stumbled inside. The room smelled of oil and iron, its shadows filled with the promise of salvation. The telegraph sat on the table, wires stretching out into the night. Naiche dropped heavily into the chair, his breath ragged. His hands trembled as he reached for the key. Eliza stood behind him, her hand pressing against his wounded shoulder, trying to stanch the blood. "Can you do it?" His lips curled into a grim smile. "They taught me their code to strip me of who I was. Tonight, I'll use it to save them all." He began to tap. The staccato clicks of Morse filled the room, urgent and sharp, a language of survival hammered out in steel and sparks. His eyes narrowed, his body taut with pain, but the rhythm never faltered. Eliza watched, awe mingling with terror. Every sound was hope carried on wires across the desert. Fort Bowie under attack, civilians trapped, reinforcements needed. Outside, boots pounded, soldiers retreating, attackers advancing. The door shook under the force of impact. Eliza raised the rifle Naiche had carried, bracing herself as shadows passed across the window. Still he tapped, sweat dripping down his brow, lips murmuring the code under his breath. At last, with one final click, he slumped back in the chair. It sent. Eliza squeezed his hand, her voice fierce, though her heart trembled. "Then they will come." The door splintered. An Apache warrior burst through, eyes blazing. Eliza's hands shook as she leveled the rifle. Before she could fire, Naich surged up with a roar, driving his shoulder into the intruder. They crashed against the wall, the rifle discharging with a deafening crack. The warrior fled into the smoke, leaving Naich swaying, his body racked with pain. But the message was out. Hope was riding the wires across the desert. The fort's yard lay choked with smoke and embers. Reinforcements had not yet come, and the defenders fought only to survive the night. Naich staggered from the telegraph office, Eliza at his side, when voices rose from the haze, not English, but Apache. Shapes emerged through the swirling smoke, 3 riders dismounting with the grace of panthers. Among them was Kolo, Naich's cousin, his braids bound with eagle feathers, his eyes burning with fury. "Kinsmen," Kolo spat in their tongue, stepping forward. "You stand with them." His arm swept toward the burning fort, the settlers, the soldiers. "Our blood is spilled, our people caged on barren land, and you fight for the jailers." Naich's jaw tightened. "I fight for the children." Kolo's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Their children, the enemy's spawn. You would shed your blood for them while your own people die in chains?" He gestured to the arrow in Naich's shoulder. "Look at you, a wounded dog, dying for those who will never call you brother." Eliza's hand found Naich's arm, steadying him. She could not understand the words, but she felt the venom in them. Naich lifted his head. His voice rang clear, steady despite the fire licking around them. "I have walked between 2 worlds all my life. Neither claimed me, neither saved me. But tonight, I choose. I choose the innocent. I choose life." A murmur rippled through the Apache warriors behind Kolo. One, younger, with a medicine pouch at his side, stepped forward. His face was painted not for war, but for ritual. "I dreamed of this," the young shaman said softly in the old tongue. "The ancestors spoke. A man between two fires would rise. He would not belong to one side, nor the other, but would hold back the flames so that children might live." Kolo snarled. "Dreams, foolish dreams whispered to boys. Our path is vengeance. We burn Fort Bowie to the ground." The shaman's gaze did not waver. "And what then? More blood, more widows, more orphans. Have we not buried enough?" Naich stepped closer, his shadow stretching against the flames. "I will not lift my hand against my people, but if you strike these children down, if you burn them alive, then you will have to kill me first." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the crackle of flames seemed to fade. Eliza held her breath. In that moment, Naich was not Ghost Rider, not Joseph of the mission school, not even Apache warrior. He was something more, a man who had chosen a path no one could force upon him. Kolo's hand hovered at his knife. For a heartbeat, murder hung in the air. Then the young shaman spoke again, his voice carrying with the certainty of prophecy. "The ancestors will remember this night. Let them choose vengeance if they wish. I choose life with him." The Apache band wavered. Some lowered their weapons. Kolo's eyes burned with betrayal, but even he felt the shift. For the first time, Naich's defiance had become something greater than rebellion. It had become a stand. The world burned red with fire and rage. Smoke curled like serpents above the fort, blotting out the moon. Screams rose and fell as the defenders wavered, muskets flashing weakly against the tide of attackers pressing at the gates. Naich stood in the yard, bleeding but unbowed, his body taut with defiance. Eliza was at his side, her face streaked with soot, clutching a trembling child. Around them, soldiers and settlers clung to the last scraps of hope. Then came the sound. At first faint, almost lost in the din, the steady thunder of hooves. Growing louder, stronger, until it rolled across the desert like a storm. Reinforcements. The cavalry burst over the ridge, sabers glinting, bugle cutting through the smoke like a clarion of salvation. The attackers faltered, shouts breaking into cries of warning. The balance of battle shifted in a heartbeat. Kolo's warriors hesitated, their formation wavering. For a moment, the night held its breath. Then, with a guttural command, Kolo pulled his band back, retreating into the desert shadows. The raid had failed. The defenders erupted in ragged cheers, voices raw with relief. But Naich did not cheer. His gaze followed his kin disappearing into the night, his heart torn between blood and choice. Eliza touched his arm gently. "You saved them," she whispered. Her eyes were wet, not with fear now, but with something deeper, gratitude, awe, and something tenderer still. Naich looked at her, then at the children huddled behind her skirts. Sarah clutched Thomas, Mary pressed close, their faces smeared with ash, but alive. Alive because of him. He drew a long breath. The pain in his shoulder throbbed, but it no longer ruled him. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. His voice, when he spoke, carried clear over the crackling fires. "No more Ghost Rider," he said. "No more shadow walking between life and death. Tonight, I stand not as a specter of vengeance, but as a guardian. For children, for those who have no one to fight for them." The words settled over the courtyard, quieting even the cheering. Soldiers turned to look, settlers hushed. For a fleeting instant, everyone, White and Apache, soldier and civilian, saw him not as enemy, but as something else, something necessary. Eliza's breath caught. In his face, she saw not only the warrior who had torn her from sacrifice, but the man he had chosen to become. The man who had found his soul not in hatred, but in protection. A fresh breeze stirred through the fort, carrying away the acrid smoke. Above, the first stars pierced the haze. Naich turned toward the desert where his kin had vanished. His choice would mark him a traitor to some, a hero to others. But in his heart there was clarity at last. He was not a ghost. He was a man reborn. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. Morning crept slowly over Fort Bowie. The sky was pale, the desert sun rising behind a haze of drifting smoke. What had once been a proud outpost of wood and stone was now scarred, its walls blackened, its barracks reduced to smoldering rubble. The air was heavy with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the silence that follows too much screaming. Survivors moved with weary steps, burying the dead in shallow graves just beyond the fort's edge. Soldiers stood with heads bowed, their uniforms stained with ash. Mothers knelt over children, whispering prayers of thanks that they had survived when so many had not. Eliza stood among them, her soot-streaked dress torn at the hem, her eyes raw from smoke and tears. She held Sarah's small hand, while Mary and Thomas leaned against her side. The children clung to her as though she were the only safe ground left in the world. And in truth, she felt the same about them. Behind her, Naich sat on a stone wall, his wounded shoulder bandaged but stiff. He said little, watching the burial details with a face carved in shadow. To the settlers, he was still a frightening figure, the ghost rider, the half-blood who walked between worlds. They kept their distance, whispering. Colonel Hayes finally emerged from the charred officers' quarters, his expression grim. He surveyed the scene, then fixed his gaze on Naich. "This fort might still be standing," Hayes said, voice sharp as flint. "But don't think I've forgotten who you are. You ride with them. I should have you in chains." The words cut through the survivors like a lash. Soldiers stiffened, civilians murmured. A few even nodded in agreement. Nightshade rose slowly, the wound pulling at his frame, but his eyes never flinched. He said nothing. Before the colonel could continue, Sergeant Morrison stepped forward. His arm was bound in a sling, his face pale, but his voice carried steady. "Begging your pardon, sir, but if not for him, you'd be burying twice as many. I saw it myself. He pulled civilians from the flames while most of us were scrambling to reload." Hayes scowled. "A man does one good deed, and you'd call him a saint?" It was then that Thomas stepped forward, his small fists balled at his sides. "He's no saint," the boy said, his voice high but unshaken. "He's better. He's the one who saved us when no one else would." Sarah's voice followed, trembling but true. "If you hurt him, you'll be hurting the man who carried me out of the fire." The crowd stirred. The innocence of children was harder to dismiss than the defense of soldiers. Even Hayes faltered, his mouth tightening as though the words lodged in his throat. Eliza felt her chest swell with a strange courage. She released Sarah's hand, stepping forward herself. "Colonel Hayes," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "if you want justice, look around you. Look at the graves. No chains will bring those souls back. But if you want a future, then let us build it here." The colonel gave a harsh laugh. "Future? This land is soaked in blood." Eliza's eyes softened, but her words cut deeper than steel. "Then it is the very soil where new seeds must be planted. If we abandon hope now, then all of this, all the loss, all the sacrifice was for nothing." For a moment, the colonel had no reply. He turned away, barking orders to the soldiers. But the seed had been spoken aloud, and the people heard it. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Eliza sat with the children in the shade of the ruined chapel wall. She smoothed Sarah's hair, then looked out at the broken fort with new clarity. "I won't go back to Denver," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "I was meant to stay, to build something here where fire tried to take everything. A place where Apache and settler children can sit side by side and learn not just letters, but mercy." Nige, sitting nearby, turned his head slightly. His dark eyes held no mockery, no disbelief. Only the faintest glimmer, as if he, too, could see the soil beneath the ashes, waiting for new life. The sun slid low across the desert, its light spilling gold over the blackened ruins of Fort Bowie. In the quiet after battle, the place felt less like a military outpost and more like a wounded village. Families sat in small circles, sharing bread, tending to burns, clinging to one another. The echo of grief still lingered, but woven through it was something fragile, almost unthinkable the day before: hope. Nige stood apart, watching. He had seen the way the soldiers still looked at him, some with suspicion, others with reluctant respect. He had lived too long in this tension to expect anything else. Ghost Rider was a name that would not vanish overnight. Yet, for the first time, he felt it was no longer a curse he carried alone. Eliza approached, her skirt brushing the dust, her hair pulled back from her smoke-marked face. She carried 2 tin cups of water, handing one to him without a word. He accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly, a touch that held no urgency, only recognition. "You don't have to stay here," Nige said quietly. "You could return east, to safety, to the life you once had." She gave a faint smile, her eyes never leaving the horizon where the mountains met the sky. "That life ended the day they tried to kill me. Perhaps it ended even before that. What I have now, it's here." She looked at him then, steady and unafraid. "Not because of comfort, but because this land needs rebuilding, and because I believe God left me here for a reason." Nate studied her. He saw no fear in her, only resolve. "And what reason is that?" Her voice softened, carrying the quiet strength of conviction. "To plant something where so much has been burned away. A school. Not just for the settlers' children, for Apache children too. A place where they might learn side by side, not just letters and numbers, but grace." For a long moment, Nate said nothing. The desert wind stirred the ashes around them, whispering through the ruined fort. At last, he spoke, his words slow and heavy with meaning. "If you build it, they will call you a fool. They will say it cannot last, that the hatred runs too deep." Her gaze did not waver. "Then let them say it. We'll prove them wrong, one child at a time." Nate let out a breath, almost like a laugh. Not bitter, but weary and touched with something new. He shook his head slightly. "You are braver than most warriors I have known." "And you," she said, her voice warm, "are more gentle than you let them see." Silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was the silence of trust, of 2 souls finding a shared path without needing to name it. Weeks later, the first beams of a new structure rose near the fort, rough timber salvaged from ruins, hammered together by soldiers, settlers, and even a few curious Apache. It was not much to look at, 4 walls, a roof half finished. But to Eliza, it was a cathedral. To Nige, it was proof that Ghost Rider's shadow had begun to fade. One evening, as the work slowed, Eliza sat on a log watching the children play in the dust. Sarah held hands with a small Apache girl, spinning in a circle until both collapsed in laughter. Thomas tried to teach Mary and another boy a skipping game, their shouts echoing against the canyon walls. Nige joined Eliza, standing just behind her shoulder. For once, his face was unguarded, softened by the sight before them. "If children can hold hands across divides," Eliza whispered, her eyes shining in the fading light, "then perhaps God has not forsaken this land after all." Naichi did not answer. He didn't need to. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe it. Ride into the heart of the frontier with our Western Love Stories series, where every tale blends dust and dawn, love and dawn, hope and redemption. Let these stories stir the echoes of your own heart, like distant church bells calling across wide, endless plains.